All right, these are my people for my speech. So there's many methods of ministry out there today, and they can make your head spin. You have contemporary or traditional music, evangelism, or discipleship. Where's all this variety come from? And is all this variety good? And I really believe that most of the differences in our ministry have come back to one thing, is our doctrine of salvation. Why do I say that? Well, our doctrine of salvation really bleeds into everything. It affects our worship, it affects our evangelism, and it affects our assurance of salvation. And what I want to try to show you today is that Calvinism is the most biblically faithful of the soteriological positions. So when I began to think about where my family was going to go to church, we wanted to find a church that was biblically faithful, and we ran into all these different kinds of things. And the more I started researching, the more I saw it come down to, really, what do people believe in regards to Calvinism versus Arminianism? I would say that Calvinism is true because it offers the best description of man. It offers the best description of God, and therefore, it gives the best description of the gospel. So the first thing that I want to look at is Calvinism is true because of its accurate description of man. So as you see on our first slide here, there's two fundamental doctrines. You have your anthropology, the doctrine of man, and you have theology, your doctrine of God. Calvinism has an accurate view of man, just as Ephesians 2:1 in the New King James says, He made you alive who was dead in trespasses and sins. The nature of our reality is total deadness to God. We're unable to respond to Him in any way, shape, or form. In this passage, it's clear that God is the one who is acting, and throughout the whole passage, it is He who made you alive, who is dead in trespasses and sins. It's not our cooperation with Him that made us alive. Calvinism is also true because it is an accurate description not only of who man is, but also who God is. Can you go to the next slide, brother? So we have this question here. The key question, the doctrine of man, the doctrine of God, is who is free? Who has true freedom? God or man? And then the answer is we do have freedom. We do have free will, but it's not a libertarian free will. We have will to choose according only to our natures. Just as a turtle cannot choose to fly, so a sinner cannot choose to do good. In the London Baptist Confession of Faith, chapter 3, it says, man, by his fall into the state of sin, has wholly lost all ability of will to do anything spiritually good accompanying salvation. So as natural man, being altogether averse from good and dead in sin, is not able by his own strength to convert himself or to prepare himself thereunto. We're in a totally dead state. But God is free to choose whom He will. In Romans chapter 9, it tells us who has power over the clay. And you can go to the next slide here. God is the only one that has power over the clay to make one lump unto honor or another unto dishonor. And so Calvinism is true, lastly, because it gives the most accurate description of the gospel. When I understand who man truly is, a wretch that deserves no good, can do no good, and is totally helpless in his sin, and a God who's totally free to save, when He chooses to save somebody, this is the most grand explanation, the most grand exposition of the gospel. If man is totally depraved, and God is free to save, then it must follow that the 5 points of Calvinism are true. The first point, total depravity. The man is totally depraved in his sin. Better put, that we are radically depraved. Everything in our core is wicked, and we cannot choose good. And if that is true, which it is, that leads to unconditional election. We have to be chosen for no reason in ourselves. God couldn't look from heaven and say that we deserve salvation in some way. He looked from heaven and of His own loving choice, because He chooses to put His love on us, we're elected. Next is limited atonement. If that is true, then the atonement that Christ did on the cross, paying our way to heaven, was effectual. That all the people that are His elect, His atonement paid for completely. next is irresistible grace. That there's a moment in time when the Spirit came, convicted us of our sin, the truth of the gospel, and we could not resist it. We saw Christ who he was, as beautiful and lovely, and we had to go to him. And lastly, we have the perseverance of the saints. That if these things are true, if God has chosen me unconditionally, if I'm totally depraved, if he's, by his limited atonement, paid for all of my sins, past, present, and future, and he's come to me and I couldn't resist his grace, then I will persevere to the end. God does not give a gift that is half. God does not give partial gifts. So in conclusion, any system of theology, truth is measured by how comprehensive an explanation it offers throughout the entirety of Scripture. Calvinism offers a holistic and comprehensive understanding that Arminianism cannot accomplish. The most important element of biblical narrative is the gospel. The simple message that God saves sinners. Not that sinners choose God and that he might save them if they do the right thing. He saves them. It is only when we have an understanding of our moral inability that we understand that God has to save us. It is not a cooperative, but it is a unilateral love that God shows to his people. Likewise, only when we take God's sovereignty and power seriously can we give him all the glory.